So those are the 12 signs. The houses are really similar because each house is ruled by a sign. So if you're looking at your birth chart, the houses start over here at what would be 7 o'clock on the, nope, 8 o'clock on a clock. It's 9 o'clock right here. I don't know, nine is here. So this hour would be the 8 o'clock hour, I suppose. Anyway, the first house starts here and then moves counterclockwise in astrology. So if you're wondering where is Mercury sitting, which pie piece, which house, this is how we would identify it. So if Mercury's in the first house, this is going to sound a lot like Aries. These are strong communicators that are often thinking about self, because the first house is the house of self. They prefer direct communication. They're thinking about their personal identity often. They can be natural leaders and can be pretty opinionated. Again, it's like Aries. I think Lindsay's smiling because that's where her Mercury sits.
Mine.
Oh, Michael's. Okay, I saw that.
She's laughing at me.
Mercury in the second house, this is similar to Mercury in Taurus. There's a practical nature to their thinking. They're often thinking about value, their own self-worth, things like money and value, tangible things. They often are thinking about building a secure life and resources or possessions in some way, shape, or form. They can struggle with ideas that are not, tangible. So abstract thought can be sometimes challenging, but it's very similar here to Mercury and Taurus. If Mercury is in the third house, this is the house of communication. This is very comfortable. Mercury rules the third house. This is also super similar to if Mercury were in Gemini. Love to learn, love to talk, communicate, share ideas. Communication can be very lively. They thrive in environments where they are able to talk to people. They tend to be able to teach and coach and share really easily. Siblings are very important to them generally, but they could be scattered by too much information. With Mercury in the fourth, this is really similar to Mercury in the sign of Cancer. So this is the house of home and family and roots. So your thought patterns are really connected to your family and your roots and your past. You prefer private, intimate conversations rather than big social ones or in public. Your communication style can be very nurturing and empathetic, and you often are thinking about the past and your family and your roots. Can be very focused on the past, in fact, where, Mercury in Aquarius is very future focused. Mercury in the fourth house or Mercury in Cancer is generally nostalgic. They're thinking a lot about the past. Mercury in the fifth house, super similar to Mercury being in the sign of Leo. So creativity, the house of creativity and pleasure and play and romance and children. So that's what they're thinking about. There's a sense of playfulness and personal enjoyment. They love to tell stories. They thrive when they're able to self-express and be creative. And generally, as I mentioned before, children are very important to them in their self-expression somehow. They might even express as a child or childlike in many ways, but this is a house of creativity. Mercury in the sixth is like Mercury in Virgo. So this is the house that's very practical, that's focused on work and tasks. It's also focused on health. These are people who can be very not even hyper focused, but more focused on health and their routines than others. They can be very analytical and focused on service and helping others. They can be very organized. Mercury in the sixth house loves checklists. They can be perfectionistic in their thinking, however. Mercury in the seventh, very similar to Mercury in the sign of Libra. where partnership and connection is really important. So communication is generally collaborative, focusing on relationship dynamics. They're often thinking about other people. They're often thinking about partnerships and their relationships. They value teamwork. They can struggle with being too accommodating to others. But again, this is very similar to Libra. If Mercury is in your eighth house, this would be very similar to Mercury in the sign of Scorpio, because the eighth house is all about transformation, death, change, rebirth. So you live for that. You're thinking a lot about transformation and growth. You would be probably interested in things like astrology and the tarot and psychology and this whole conversation. Um, can be deeply emotional in the ways in which you communicate, and you can be pretty profound in some of your thinking, but secrets and being distrustful of others and withholding your thoughts could be a thing if you have Mercury in the eighth house. I have Mercury in my eighth house. No, I don't. No, I don't. Seventh. Seventh. No, I don't. I have other planets in the eighth. Okay, in the ninth, this is really similar to Sagittarius. So thinking about big picture, philosophy, higher learning, exploring, spirituality. Um, this is a really philosophical position for Mercury. Again, if Mercury's in the ninth house, this can be travel and foreigners and foreign languages. Um, they tend to struggle with details because they're very big picture focused. Mercury in the 10th, the house of career and vocation, super similar to Mercury in Capricorn. So these are people who can be very professional, very structured, goal-oriented. They can be ambitious, very mindful of their speech, seeking to be recognized. They may struggle to be vulnerable with people because they prefer more control in their thinking rather than emotional sort of connection. It's not to say that these people are not emotional, by the way. We're just talking about one part of a chart. Mercury in the 11th is really similar to Mercury being in Aquarius. So this is the house of people and future. So these people can be very focused on social groups, social causes, innovation, science, friendships, technology. They may struggle with intimate emotional conversation because they would prefer more intellectual. This would be like the scientist and the coder archetype rather than, maybe the motherly archetype. But they're often thinking about the ways in which they can improve society or systems as a whole. And then Mercury in the 12th would be very similar to Mercury in Pisces. The 12th house has to do with transcendence, has to do with creativity and spirituality. So they might be deeply connected to the unconscious mind. So a lot of times, Mercury in the 12th, you may have moved through many things in life that have you experiencing trauma, even. But they can be very dreamlike, very creative, very artistic. These, again, are the people who are not thinking in a linear fashion. And they definitely need time alone to process their thoughts and ideas. It's really important. Now, of course, as we go through this, I made the connections between the signs and the houses, but what I invite you to do when you're sort of reflecting and take a breath here would be to see, okay, where is the planet Mercury in my chart, in what sign, and then what house? Because by the way, those stories may be different. For example, you may have Mercury in Aries in the 7th house, which is the case for me. So this fiery, impulsive, quick thinking type energy in my thoughts, very much focused on partnership and relationships. I think about it a lot. But Mercury in the 10th house in Aries would be different. It would be fiery like this, but I'd be thinking more about my career and about achieving and about success more often than perhaps relationship. So as you can see, the sign tells us about how Mercury is being expressed, but the house tells us where in life we're mostly focusing that attention or that energy. And so you may find when you look at your chart that there's a little bit of a paradox. Maybe you have Mercury in Aquarius in the fourth house. Well, Aquarius energy is very individual, and the fourth house has a lot to do with the past and family. And that may seem like a contradiction, but if you feel into it, you'll understand a depth to your own being that maybe you didn't know before. So this is just one example of the power of astrology, of course. So understanding your placement of Mercury in your chart not only reveals how you communicate, but what your habitual thoughts and patterns are. And if you can learn to understand what that is, you can more consciously shape your thoughts and manifest what you want. Because most people are not necessarily aware of their patterns of thoughts. But if you look at your chart, you can start to understand that, oh, this is actually part of my soul's signature to focus on this or to think about these topics. And so, really, the whole point of me sharing this with you here is so that you can have more essentially creative expression over your life by understanding how your mind works to begin with, because everyone's is different. And of course, if you understand yourself in this way, it also becomes much more possible for you to have the same level of respect and understanding for other people in your life. To recognize that, oh, I mean, maybe it's obvious to you that people think differently and they communicate differently. But when you start to recognize perhaps the archetypes that are coming through people, then you can honor them a lot more. And if we extend this to a conversation about leadership, right? Understanding ourselves, understanding our thought patterns, understanding the ways in which we communicate is foundational, of course. But if we can extend that to others as well inside of our organizations or our teams, well, then we can have a much more effective connection. You ask leaders, most of them are going to tell you that the biggest challenges on their teams are communication. Well, if you understand your communication style and the ways in which your mind is sort of thinking, all the better.